So hopefully you can all see my presentation. You obviously have access to the chat box there. So I'll be checking the chat box periodically, and just thanks in advance for participating in this webinar. So we'll go ahead and get started. So hi everybody, my name is Julie Dennis. As I mentioned, I'm a program manager here and I deal with all things related to TQS, reaccreditation, accreditation, and my favorite, standards. I'm joined on the phone with Dana Smith, who's the Vice President of Organizational Health. She'll be chatting with us a little bit more, but first of all, I just want to thank you for joining us. We're talking, of course, today about the 2020 Abridged reaccreditation process. I also want to let you know a few housekeeping items. You're all muted. There's a chat box. I'll be checking it frequently throughout. And then we have questions, time for questions at the end, time for questions peppered throughout. And then additionally, if you want me to unmute you, I can do that as well. So you can just let me know in the chat box. Also, just want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. And so we will have it online on the NRC for us all to watch later if you so desire. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in. And hopefully you can all hear me and everything. And I anticipate that if you couldn't, you would be letting me know in the good old chat box. So, alrighty. So TQS, we're going to do a real quick wrap up of where we are now. For those of you who were able to join me in July, I did a kind of an overall, an overview, I should say, of where we were at that time with the 2020 Abridged process, and we've come a little bit further from there. So we just want to give you some really high level but good background information, just in case you're wondering why do we do this thing. Then we're going to talk specifically about reaccreditation components and process, document storage and review, 2020 reaccreditation timeline. Of course, as I mentioned, we have sections throughout for questions, but of course we'll make sure you get all of your questions answered. And then I'm going to show you a really quick demo on Box. And to preface that, I will let you know that your current box that you have for your affiliates does not have currently the structure for 2020. I'm just fixing a couple more things, making sure I do my due diligence on editing some of the items, but they will, I anticipate them being dropped by the end of next week, if not sooner. And you'll get an email when I do that, and you can go from there. But without further ado, let's move over to TQS. Where are we now? So just a really quick refresher, June of 2015, or July of 2015, I should say, June 2015, we had the network accredited, but July is when we released those student support standards that we dubbed TQS 2.0 student support standards. And then in January at Leadership Town Hall, TQS 2.0 business standards. And throughout the reaccreditation cohorts, 17, 18, 19, and of course you are 20, we have essentially used that as our base. Of course, you all know that in the fall of 2018, we did a recalibration. So we did put reaccreditation for 2018 on hold. We recalibrated and then picked up right where we left off with that cohort for 2018, and then moved, of course, to our cohort for 2019, and here you are, 2020. So there we are, we're hanging out, we're doing some snowshoeing, fun things like that. So the reason for the recalibration is actually, I'm going to let Dana talk to you about that. And again, some of this might be a refresher of information that we discussed in July, or maybe that you've heard throughout our various webinars around TQS and the need for recalibration, but I just think it's really important to ground us in why we go through this accreditation, reaccreditation process and what total quality system even means. So Dana?
Yeah, thanks so much, Julie. Can you guys hear me okay, Julie?
I can hear you, yes.
Great. Well, we're going to assume the others can too, and if they can't, maybe they'll jump up in the chat box. So why did we recalibrate? So for a few different reasons, we decided to take a step back and look at, in particular, the business standards back in 2018. But the biggest reason that we decided to look at a recalibration is because we had a new business plan. We have a strategic business plan that has some very distinct goals within it. They all align under either deepening the work, sustaining the work, or growing the work. And we wanted to make sure that our objectives for total quality systems aligned with those strategic business plan objectives. And so there's a piece of that that we just needed to ensure that we were doing, but we were also getting great feedback from the network, and we wanted to ensure that we were listening to our network and the needs of the network of what was going on at that point. So we did not have any updated research at that point to do anything or change anything about our student support standards, but we did do a recalibration of the business standards in particular. And so in doing so, it was with feedback from the network, with oversight from the governance committee, as well as the student supports committee, to really, in particular, look at the indicators that were being requested from the affiliates to achieve the standard being met. It was looked at to make sure that we were allowing for nuance based upon size of organization, because some of the standards are really overly burdensome for affiliates that were exceedingly large. And similarly, there were some that were overly burdensome for affiliates that were very small. And so we needed to allow for a little bit more nuance and allow for affiliates to really be able to tell their own story. And we wanted to make sure that we could do that. I mean, the ultimate goal for Total Quality Systems is to ensure that we have a consistency in our network, and we have sustained business practices for our organizations so that our organizations can continue and to sustain and grow, which will ultimately ensure that services to students will be sustained. At the end of the day, everything that we look at with our litmus test is if it's good for students, we want to make sure that we can continue making that a reality for them. And so that's why we have TQS and we include business standards as a part of TQS, is because the organizations that are providing services to students, we need to make sure that those organizations can continue to serve students and do it in a very healthy and sustainable way. Julie, why don't you go to the next slide, if you don't mind.
I think it's...
So the other...
I'm trying.
Is it just lagging a little bit? That's fine.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. The internet is being slow.
Well,
so the other main reason we have TQS, and the thing that we've really started looking towards as we did a recalibration, is ensuring that we have with a lens of continuous improvement. And so when we think about continuous improvement for TQS, we want to make sure, like I said before, we allow for some nuances, but that we also are doing it in a way that can set affiliates up for success. So in 2018, this is the kind of the timeline she talked about before, or talked about with the big picture, but zooming in a little bit specifically on the recalibration on business standards. We had focus groups in 2018 from all over our network statewide, as well as local affiliates based upon size, based upon region, based upon types of organizations, provide a lot of feedback around the business standards and around TQS as a whole. We listened to that feedback and took that back to a working group, which was made up mostly of folks from the network, state offices and local affiliates, that really dove into the nuance word by word of each of the individual standards of the business standards and the indicators that were required to meet those business standards, which then produced the recalibrated business standards in December of 2018. The affiliates that were going through reaccreditation in 2018 were pushed pause and then were re-looked at with the new lens of the recalibrated business standards. The affiliates that went through the 2019 cohort were examined under those recalibrated business standards and are just now starting to receive their reports. The big picture is, though, zooming out, is that in those focus groups that we had in 2018, we were given a lot of great information and additional feedback from the network that we don't want to lose sight of, but they were bigger picture pieces of feedback that really require us to do a full redesign of what TQS is looking at, especially because we want to have a deeper focus on continuous improvement, and we want to be honest with ourselves around what we can examine and have accountability for around quality. When we talk about total quality systems, I'll be really honest and say it's hard to look at certain aspects and measure quality with some of the standards. And so we want to make sure that we're being transparent with you guys and honest with ourselves, that we can manage risk and we can manage opportunities for continuous improvement and ensure sustainable organizations is the goal of what we're trying to do with TQS. So in light of that, and of the feedback that we got with those focus groups, is that we're going to be doing a bigger picture redesign of TQS. And as a part of that redesign, we're going to be incorporating that feedback, as well as additional research and data points that we've now been learning. So there's more to come on that. I don't want to dive too much into that, but I want to make sure you guys are aware of that. The reason that we're really focusing on an abridged timeline right now is because we want to make sure that all affiliates have been looked at under the lens of the TQS 2.0 standards including the recalibrated business standards, because it's an important piece to ensure that there is fidelity to the model and that there is, honestly, that we have had some accountability throughout the network over the last 5 years with these business standards. So the business standards rolled out in 2016, so I guess technically it's not 5 years, but that there has been opportunity for affiliates to align themselves with those business standards that were more rigorous than the 1.0 business standards, as well as the student support standards, to ensure that we do have fidelity to the model, as we're all calling ourselves communities and schools, that we ensure that there is fidelity to that work. So if you go to the next slide, I think that ultimately the goal, oh, we're supposed to talk specifics, sorry. Well, I kind of already walked through that, sorry. Go to the next slide, I apologize. Sorry. So ultimately the goal is that we're trying to ensure that we get honest and transparent answers from executive directors and board chairs. We're doing that with much more detailed answers through an attestation, which we're gonna talk a little bit about. And that we are less burdensome on the amount of documentation that's required, as well as less of a burden on the board through the indicators that are required to be met. Ultimately, all of those pieces will allow for affiliates to have TQS as a tool for continuous improvement and not feel as punitive, hopefully, as some people were feeling in the past. So that's kind of what we're working towards. We recalibrated specifically the business standards, and like I said before, we are in the process of looking at a full redesign of both the business and the student support standards going into 2021, as well as what the process will look like based upon that feedback that we got from the focus group.
Great.
So one more slide.
Well, just about where the recalibrated standards are. So this is found on the same page of the NRC. So when you go to the NRC and go to affiliate standards, the independent affiliate business and student support standards there do include those recalibrated standards. So just wanting to make sure that everyone has the most up-to-date standards, because I think that there's been some confusion throughout the network about what the indicators are, since we did, as Dana mentioned, recalibrate. And so I just want to make sure that you have access to the most up-to-date standards, that you know exactly what we're requiring of affiliates. So there we
One
are
more
there.
thing to add really fast, Julie, is just want to make sure everyone knows that ultimately the goal is here that we have all the affiliates fully reaccredited by the end of 2020. So the abridged version will hopefully expedite that process for the last few affiliates that we'll be going through. The list of affiliates she's got up on the screen now are the last of the affiliates that need to go through the 2.0 standards, be reviewed with the 2.0 standards, I mean. And hopefully we'll be able to achieve that by the end of 2020, so that when early 2021, the goal is that we roll out the new business standards and new student support standards that have alignment with the research that we've been doing, as well as incorporating that additional feedback from the network around the process.
Absolutely. All right, so here's just a quick look at who's up for the abridged reaccreditation process. So we have a few states with state offices. Well, all of them have state offices. So, so you can also lean on your state office as a resource as we kind of walk through the process, and we'll kind of get to how we both at CIS National as well as your state offices can provide some assistance throughout this reaccreditation process. So there we go. So I also just want to let you know that about where the other cohorts are. As I mentioned, we had a cohort from 2017, 2018, 2019, and of course you then are the abridged 2020 cohort. I really think that this is important in understanding this, that, you know, this is something that we all go through together. TQS is a process that every independent affiliate has gone through in some way or another in the past 4 years. And so for the 2017 cohort, you can see here that 28 of the 29 have achieved reaccreditation. And we are still working on one affiliate in particular with some data and system work through that cohort. For 2018, very similarly, 22 of 29 affiliates have achieved reaccreditation, and we're working with 7 affiliates very closely to get them reaccredited through their extension periods. And then for 2019, we actually just started. Most are in review, which is what that 29 and the red represents. And then we have 5 who were just voted on in early January, and those folks are in extension. So that's kind of where we are as a network. So I just want to make you feel like you know, there's some solidarity in our network about TQS, about reaccreditation, about this process. And so I don't want you, as we're going through the abridged process, to think that you're the only ones left out there just because you're the last. There are other affiliates who are still in extension as well. So
last but not least.
Yes, exactly. And now I have time for questions. I don't know if anyone has any questions on anything that we went over. Again, we're trying to go through that kind of quickly because we do know that you probably want to know the meaty part of the webinar with where to upload all of your items. But if anybody has any questions about kind of where we are in the process, I'd be happy to check out the chat box now, and you can enter your questions there. So I'll just pause for 30 seconds. So just remember, you have a chat and you can put your question in. Okay, I don't see any questions. So then let's move on to the reaccreditation components and process. So again, this is for the 2020 Abridged, and hopefully you know who you are from that previous slide of our 9 affiliates going through this process. So we kind of already discussed this, but why do we go through this process is, of course, to maintain network alignment. It's to ensure a manageable process of prioritizing value add for the executive director, board, and site staff. Also, life cycle. We hear, you know, obviously in the nonprofit life cycle, a lot of ED transitions happen, and we understand that. So TQS is supposed to be that kind of solid base that will sustain organizations across ED transitions, board chair transitions, etc. Any kind of transition that your affiliate might be incurring. And then the last thing is that we really do use this as we kind of have been talking about the past few years, a continuous improvement tool and a way to not only ensure business practices are solid and sound, but then obviously with our student support standards to ensure that fidelity to the model and to ensure that we're serving the kids to the best ability that we can be serving them. So we use this process, I think, even though it's just 3 letters, we use it to, I think, really encompass a lot of the work that we do, and in my opinion, the most important work, because it's the work with our kiddos. So that's kind of an overview there. Typical reaccreditation components. So I say typical because you typically have the alignment with the TQS standards. So every 3rd year participate, that's what you're kind of in this process. We're maintaining and updating the organizational files, and that's what we're going to get to. Most of the webinar today will be box.com discussion. These attestations, so submitting annual detailed responses, we'll also talk about that a little bit more. If you had gone through this process under 1.0, we always had some sort of board chair and executive director questions to answer and then sign off on, but these attestations are supposed to be really more detailed and more particular about your everyday practices as a nonprofit, being an affiliate of CIS. And then we always keep these assessments on here, and then site visit and verification procedures. And this is where number 4 is the difference. We will not be doing any site visits or verification procedures for this reaccreditation cohort. And in later slides, I actually have a big old X over some of these pieces. So you do not have to worry about site visits and the verification procedures from a CIS national perspective, because we will not be doing them for this cohort. So component 1, reaccreditation, your details. So your typical, and we'll get to this when we talk about timelines. So we will open box.com. Box.com will be opened no later than next Friday. That will have everything that you need to upload, as well as guides and box.com notes and things like that to keep you going. Then you will have from that time until June 1st to upload. When you upload, we then do a review. So we'll be doing that review sometime over June, July, August. We'll be taking a report to the TQS Governance Committee, which I'll talk about in one moment. If there are any extensions needed, then we'll be giving you an appropriate timeline for that extension, and then hopefully you'll be reaccredited as an affiliate of communities and schools. A couple of things that I just want to reiterate that I feel like we talk about a lot, but extensions are not bad things. Extensions just mean that you just need a little bit more time to get certain policies or certain procedures up to our standards. And I cannot emphasize this enough, that every affiliate that has gone through reaccreditation from our 2017 cohort until 2019 thus far has received an extension. So we do not anticipate that we anticipate that will continue, and that all 9 affiliates for this cohort will receive an extension. And I just want to let you know that that is okay. And that, of course, even though we have this goal of getting everybody reaccredited by the end of 2020, I think that we can still achieve that even with extensions. So just laying that out there as something that I know really, I think, concerns affiliates, and it's not a major concern for me if an affiliate goes into extension. So then the governance committee, as I mentioned. So this is the TQS governance committee. It's made up of 7 members, 3 national and 4 from the network, and they essentially vote on all of the reaccreditation reports. So what happens in this process is Vox will close June 1st. We at National will do a review of all the documentation and create a report for the TQS Governance Committee, take that report in front of the TQS Governance Committee, and they vote. The extension timelines that they've decided to use for 2019, which I surmise would be also used for 2020, is 90 days, which means that from the time that we have a follow-up phone call conversation about your report to the time that when the clock starts, and then you have 90 days to update, upload, do whatnot for your extension. And then after that 90-day period, we create a new report for the TQS Governance Committee. It goes back in front of them for a vote. They vote, and hopefully you are reaccredited. And as I mentioned, but I cannot emphasize enough, as I said, all affiliates received an extension. So that is that. Oops, I'm behind in my. So component 2 is attestations. So the board chair, as well as the executive director, will complete board chairperson and executive director attestations and sign this to attest the board's and organization's commitment to TQS. So I'll kind of walk through that a little bit later. It's actually a link, and it's a cognito form. It's several pages long. As I mentioned, it's a bit more comprehensive than what we had done in the past. And it's really recommended that for some of the items that you as the executive director work with your board chair on. For example, there's one question there, when was the last time that you updated your insurance? I don't know if the board chair off the top of his or her or their head would know when the last time the insurance was updated, but you could probably provide them with that answer and guide them a little bit in that way. So we do recommend that, not a requirement, of course, but just a recommendation. And again, I'll kind of walk through what, they look like a little bit later on during the demo. Let's see. So again, component 4, not doing it, site visits and verification procedures. As Dana mentioned, we do want to get everyone reaccredited by late 2020, and if we added site visits in particular to this schedule, it would just not get done. So we are not going to be doing any site visits for this cohort. So what's included in abridged reviews? So 16 out of 38 business standards, and I will get to that in a moment because there are some things that we added since we talked in July, if you attended the July webinar. The standards were chosen based on their importance to CIS brand, adherence to best practices, and risks to the students we serve. So there are still 22 standards that we are not reviewing, and some of those standards do have a lot, they really do have a high box.com upload frequency. So I do feel like the 16 that we are including is manageable in this abridged space. To kind of give you, without going into over detail, we did an abridged review in 2016 as affiliates were getting used to the TQS 2.0 standards, and we used that as somewhat of a base for this abridged review. However, any affiliate that went through in 2016 was not officially reaccredited. So if they didn't meet those, abridged review standards, it didn't affect their reaccreditation. They still went through either in 17, 18, 19, or 19. whereas this is affecting your reaccreditation status. You will be reaccredited under this abridged review. And so for that reason, when we looked at finalizing this process in the late fall, early December, and earlier this year, we realized that there were a couple of standards that we really needed to include, in particular because of the risk to students that we serve. And so I'm going to talk about those momentarily. So here they are. This is page 1 of 2 of the standards that are included. Anything with the 2 asterisks was not originally included in the July 2019 webinar, so we did add them in. However, I do, as I mentioned, feel that these are things that all affiliates should have. You should all have an agreement with your state office, you should all have insurance, and you should all have a budget for the 2019-2020 calendar year. And so I don't feel like it's an overburden to just include those few things. So again, we have the branding and communications standard, bylaws, strategic plan, insurance, financial management, budget audit, and then on this slide, we have some data management, data verification, parent guardian consent verification, personnel policies, screening, background checks, and volunteer policies. A couple of caveats about this is that you might have said, well, I thought that you weren't doing verifications. You said that as part of the site visit. That's a national verification. We are not verifying you as an affiliate, but data verification and parent guardian consent verification is always included because affiliates are anticipated and expected to verify themselves. And that's just because we want to make sure that every kid that's served has a parent guardian consent. That's a huge risk. And so that's important. And the same thing with the data. We want to make sure that every student that's served is a student who is, enrolled in the school in which he or she or they are served. So that is why, in case you were like, wait a second, verification is included, this is a different type of verification. It's not a national verification, it's you verifying yourself. All right. And then we do have the student support standards. So for up to 5 schools, student support standards 1.1 through 1.4, 2.1 through 2.6, 3.1 through 3.5, and we will not be reviewing reports for standards 4.1 through 4.3. However, we will run a full TQS data report. So that means that if you serve 10 schools, you only have to upload documentation for 5 of them. If you serve 10 model schools, you only have to upload documentation for 5 of them. However, when we pull the TQS data report, we would anticipate that all 10, we would look at the data for all 10. We wouldn't just look at the data for the 5 that you uploaded the information for. And then lastly, before I get to another set of time for questions, is on the general use services. So the only thing that will be checked for general use services is essentially if you have a different consent form that you use for GYS schools versus for model schools, you would just upload that. So that's technically an upload, but if it's the same consent form, then you don't have to re-upload it numerous times. And we'll get to that when we talk about box. And then we're going to check system data, that you're just entering the supports in system and recording them. I always think that this is really helpful because I think a lot of affiliates aren't quite sure how to classify some of their sites. So a model is a site is one that we consider where you're implementing the full model, meaning that you're doing all 3 tiers of support, including, of course, tier 2 and tier 3, which is the case management. General use services site is one that where you're not intending on implementing the model. It might be that you're case managing a handful of high-risk students, but tier 1 services are mostly the focus. And if you have any questions about that, you can always talk to, first of all, your state office. Secondly, and one of the things that we'll be talking about a little bit later is that each affiliate will get a reaccreditation liaison to help them through the process, and you could always talk to them as well. That's a person, the reaccreditation liaison is a staff member from CAS National who is your helper outer, to put it in layman's terms, through the reaccreditation process, and is there to guide you and to answer any questions. All right, so now that I've been talking a lot, do we have any questions? Let me pull up my chat box. I know I threw a lot of information. So please, any questions that you have, go in the chat box, and I'd be happy to answer them. a sip of water while I'm reading.
Can I add something while you're checking for questions? I just want to make sure we clarify on the general use services versus the model schools. Model schools, you may not be meeting every aspect of the standards. Like for example, the one that comes up often is maybe you're not hitting saturation rates for case management at a specific school. That does not mean that that school is a general use service school. If your intent is that you're providing all 3 tiers of support, like Julie mentioned, that is the model school. So just because you're not meeting a specific standard doesn't mean that it's not a model school and we want you to reclassify it. I'm going to be really clear about that. We want to make sure that you understand general use services is a completely different type of school or type of services that's exclusively provided there. So for example, and often one we see in our network is a school that only has 21st century after school programming as a general use service school is a common one that we see. There is not case management that's happening throughout the day. There's not the 3 tiers of support. It is just providing after school programming.
Yep. So there was a question to just repeat the 4 additional requirements. So they are that were not included in the July webinar. So they are agreement with the state office, insurance, which is so 1.6, which is agreement with state office, 2.8, which is insurance, budget, which is standard 3.3, and then additionally we have the school district support, which is standard 4.4. Sure, okay. Any other questions? Great. All right, so there'll be 2 additional times, I think, for questions. So if you didn't want to ask one now, you have a couple more chances. So document storage and review. So hopefully you're somewhat familiar with box.com, but if not, no worries. We'll be going through that today and hopefully spending some of the time on this. So Box.com is a file sharing service. It uses cloud-based tools to store and share any type of file. You actually can access it via 2 ways. So you could do it via your web browser, or you could do it, I have mine synced. So it just kind of comes up as any other files in my, when I click on my files. So that's the first thing that I want to say about Box.com. The second thing is that Box.com is a free service that we at CIS National offer. So if hopefully you have a login to your Box.com, but if you ever come across Box.com where you have to pay for something, you're part of our license, so you don't have to do that. So if there's any questions about how to access BoxSync and you're coming up with it's requiring me to pay, please do not pay. Please flag that for either your state office and or for one of us, in particular me at CIS National, and my contact information will be at the end so that we can get you to the proper login that is free because you're covered under us. Okay, so document storage and review. So this is pretty, hopefully laid out simply. We have our business standards, student support standards. Typically we would have general use services documents, but you can see there that there's no upload required. And then we have a folder just of Box.com guidance. So this is how essentially when you log in and you go to your folder for the 2020 Abridges Reaccreditation, this is the main screen that you'll see. So all of your other files for accreditation will be outside of the 2020 folder, and you could actually copy those over if you needed or wanted to. And then of course the folders are organized by the type of standard: business, student supports, general use services, and then we have a process folder. So that's essentially the main layout, and then we'll kind of do a deeper dive into each one. So going into the one file, which is that business documents, it's board minutes and supporting documents, and then it's just 1 through 5 corresponding with the business standards. So business board minutes and financial monitoring documentation should be provided there. We actually only have 2 things that we would require board minutes 1.4, and that's the audit as well as the budget. Otherwise, board minutes is not one of the required standards for the abridged review. So just keep that in mind, and that's why it'll look a little different when we dive into specifically that folder. And then again, 1 through 5 simply corresponds with the other business standards. A couple of things to note is that if you do not see a folder, that means one of two things. For this purposes of the reaccreditation for abridged reaccreditation, it means that it's not a requirement, or it could mean that regardless of whether you were being reaccredited under the abridged or one of the other cohorts, it's not required as a box.com upload. And I can show you some examples of that when we move through the demo. So as you see here, when we go into the 1, you see 1.4 and 1.6. So 1.4 is branding. That's where you upload anything pertaining to the branding standard. 1.6 is that agreement with the state office. Then you have the documents required box note. This is your individual checklist. And you could see here that it is literally a checklist of what you would need to provide into each folder. You'll notice that we're not requiring business standard 1.2, and so that's why there's no folder for 1.2. For the abridged review, we don't require that. You'll also notice that there's no folder for 1.1, and that's because that's your trademark license agreement, and regardless, we have access to that because we hold the trademark license agreement at CAS National, and so we said it's not really prudent for affiliates to have to upload something that we have access to, so that's why we don't require it as a box.com upload for reaccreditation. We'll talk about this when we do the demo, but box notes are really helpful for kind of filling in reviewers as you kind of go through the process, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about how to do that. But when I have given this webinar, I really want affiliates to think about, what it's essentially as if we are coming down for a site visit, except we're doing that site visit from, Virginia, right across from the nation's capital. So what kind of things do you need to tell us that we might not gather from just looking at a document? And that's the type of thing that a box note might be helpful with. All right. For student support standards, again, the schools are labeled there 1 through 5. You're more than welcome if it provides some clarity for you to rename the schools into their actual name. And then you would upload the required documents for up to 5 CS model schools, and those documents are in the box note. If you have fewer than 5 CS model schools, then you just would upload up to that number. So if you have 3 model schools, you'd upload for 3. And then you actually would have the option to delete those other folders because they would be blank, or just put no school or whatnot, or do nothing with them. So that is kind of how we do the model schools. Oh, and this actually brings up a good point, which is where my brain just had a moment, where we are really cognizant of the fact that box.com can be essentially a little bit of a time constraint for uploading all of that documentation. And so we really encourage you to only upload something once. So for example, if you use the same parent guardian consent form at all 5 of your model schools, you do not have to upload it for each model school. You would just upload it once, and then that's a perfect opportunity to use a box note to say the consent form is used throughout all of our model schools. So again, I can't emphasize this enough either, that we understand that box can be time consuming with the upload. So please only upload something once. And then even if you think it would be better to have it in various locations, and then you could write us a box note or let us know, and we will find it. So I don't want you to have to re-upload the same document over and over and over again. That's just not a good use of your time as executive directors. And then the X comes back. So general use services, you do not have to upload anything. We're checking the data, and so no site agreements are required. And then attestations. So this is the attestation link. I'll demo that when we get into Box.com. And the attestation forms are required to be completed by each executive director and board chair separately. There's actually a place in the, you can kind of see it on the screen where it says position. And if you click executive director, or if you click board chair, that alters the questions for the following pages. So it's imperative that you actually click once, and depending upon your role, so that the proper questions populate. So again, these serve as a virtual interview for reviewers to have better context about on-site operations. So we really do want these to be a little bit more detailed. Of course, as you know, you don't have to write paragraphs upon paragraphs upon paragraphs upon paragraphs of information, but give us enough information so that we really have a good understanding of your business practices, of your student support practices, of how you essentially operate as an affiliate. And again, I really take this as a way for us as if we are doing a site visit, but we're doing it virtually. So as much information as you feel like you need to provide us to give us a clear picture of how you operate as an affiliate. So that's where the responses should be comprehensive and specific come in. I'm not sure, Dana, did you want to add anything about the attestations?
I think if you have a question, don't hesitate to work with your liaison if you're trying to figure out the best answer to give. But yeah, I think Julie is right. Like the more information you give, the less we'll have to follow up with later, but don't feel like you have to write, your dissertation.
Right, yeah. All right, so that's great. So now we have two requirements that these are required of all CAS affiliates. At least 51% of affiliate expenditures must be committed, to CAS model schools. And so how we do this is we review the budget mostly to see how you're spending money. And then affiliates must have a minimum of 2 comprehensive CS model schools. So those are the 2 things that are required. What you'll notice in the budget folder is if you are concerned that you will not meet that 51% requirement, there's an actual template and it looks something like this. It can also be found on the NRC, but it is in your Box.com folder in the 3.3 budget folder. You could fill this out, and then depending upon where you land, the certain circumstances of your affiliate and the way in which you might be organized, you can talk to your state office about if an exemption request is necessary. And so then if you would talk to your state office, the state office agrees that an exemption request would be necessary, then you would apply for that exemption, or your state office would do it on your behalf, but the exemption request would be applied for, and then the TQS Governance Committee would vote on that. I will say that they have approved exemption requests, and they've also denied exemption requests. So it is not something to just be taken lightly because, you think that you somehow don't want to do this model implementation requirement. It is something that you would do if you really felt like there was no other way except through the exemption request. So we want to make sure that exemption requests are used appropriately. All right. So rules of the road. So just a couple of things here. We have lots of guides, lots of folders. I've seen this done so many different ways, and all I have to say is you do whatever way works best for you. If you are a paper person, print out one of the checklists and just check it all off as you upload. If you like to use Box, you can literally make check marks in the Box.com notes. If you maybe are like, you know what, this is fine by me, I don't need any additional guides, that's fine too. It's whatever works best for you to get all the documentation uploaded to Box for us to review. Additionally, I would just recommend that you use clear naming conventions when uploading things to Box. So CS Honolulu Strategic Plan, that just makes it easier for us. It's not that we won't find it if it's not labeled clearly. It's just that, we are human and we do tend to miss things if it's not at least in my case, staring me straight in the face. So it's just a help for us. Again, it doesn't mean that you'd get a follow-up action item if you didn't have something labeled correctly, but it's just, you know, helpful. Again, as I mentioned, standards have been updated, so make sure that you're looking at the correct standards. And we are trying to keep the NRC updated as well with the accreditation process and standards. I'll be kind of refreshing the 2020 page, especially when I get this recording, because the recording and the webinar will go up for all of us, but that probably won't happen until next week as well. So you could always check the NRC. There will be updates to the special page for 2020. And then the last thing is that I just wanted to let you know about communication. So consistent email communication, specific emails, and you will have that reaccreditation liaison. We are still working out exactly who has whom, but the reaccreditation liaison will likely contact you probably in March, just set up a call. I did a lot of these last year, and the call was really just a kind of getting to know you, anything that concerns you, any questions that you might have, and then we'll check in with you as we get closer to June 1st, and then actually we'll do a quick check with you after June 1st. So this liaison is somebody who essentially sticks with you throughout the entirety of the reaccreditation process, and will potentially be the same person helping you out if you were to move to extension. So this is somebody that you can really lean into at CAS National. All of the liaisons are very knowledgeable, and if they can't answer the question with you right there on the phone, they will find the answer and get back to you in an appropriate time. So in that spirit, we just ask that you too be as communicative with us throughout the reaccreditation process. Again, my email will be at the end, and I'm always happy to answer questions, to hop on a call. I am here for you as we go through this process as an additional support. And then of course, lastly, is because all of you do have state offices, I would just highly recommend leaning into the state office. They're wonderful resources as well, and we work, you know, simultaneously with them throughout TQS and the reaccreditation process. So that is that. So lastly, I'll just do the timeline, and then I'll pause for questions before we do the demo. And then we'll do the demo, and I can answer questions for the end as well. So quickly, reaccreditation timeline. So, oops, my mouse is being funny. Here we are. So we did this, there we go. We did this introductory webinar in July of 2019. It did lay out, hopefully, the abridged process and timeline. And then obviously today is more of the box.com webinar so that you can begin uploading. So again, Box will open shortly after the webinar. I just want to check a couple more things and do my due diligence there. Box will close on June 1st of 2020, so you must have all of your documents uploaded by that date. After that date, your liaison will do a cursory review, just checking to make sure things are uploaded, that they can be opened by reviewers, that they can, there's not pages missing, things that, you know, kind of happen in, you know, when you're scanning in documents and uploading documents with technology. And then we'll be doing a full review here at CAS National sometime at the end of June, probably early July, and that will kind of continue. We do a pretty intense workshop, and then I'm in charge of kind of polishing up those reviews and getting them into the pretty reports that we send then to the TQS Governance Committee. So TQS Governance Committee will hopefully start in August. September, they only meet once a month. I don't think I mentioned that before when I was chatting about them, typically the second Thursday of the month. So we don't want to bombard them with all 9 affiliates at once. That would be a lot of reading. So we'll probably divide it up and maybe even add in an additional vote. But my whole point to say is that hopefully by the end of September at the latest, early October, you'll be receiving your we'll be setting up a call, you'll be receiving your report, you'll be put into extension, and then the timeline for the 90 days would begin then. And of course, the goal of reaching reaccreditation by December of 2020 is our goal. So that is the timeline. So any questions there on that? So this is me, this is my contact information. My last name is often confused for my first name, but my first name is Julie, last name Dennis. And again, just want to make sure that you all have access to me. I'm always available for calls, emails, whatever you need to get your questions answered. All right, so are there any, before I start, I do see a question in the chat. So let's see.
Julie, there was a question in the Q&A. I don't know if you've seen that one.
I did.
Okay.
So great. So yes, there was a question about state offices. So state offices, this is a little similar but different. So state offices, their kickoff Box.com webinar is in March. Hopefully all state offices should have received an email invitation, a Zoom invitation for March 20th. I believe it's a Friday. And then your timeline is a little bit different, where I believe we've had August 1st to be the upload time period. Since you're not getting your box until later, we are moving the due date a little bit later. We'll be doing a review in August, September, October, and then extensions as necessary. So that's a high overview. To answer the second part of that question, yes, it will be abridged. There will be more discussed on this March 20th webinar. Essentially, it will be these same standards from the affiliate, from this, the 2020 abridged group is going through. It will be those same standards. So those same 16 standards. And then depending upon what type of state office you are, it would include student support standards. So we can talk, I think, a little bit more offline about that, because I do want to get to the demo about this group, which is independent affiliates. But yes, abridged states coming in March for the Box.com webinar, similar to this, but different. Any other questions? Great.
Julie, there was another one that popped up in the Q&A about the 51%. So the question is the 51% based on your total organizational budget or on your budget for your school site programs? So I included in the response, I just replied to response, so you could see the actual language in the standard. The standard reads, at least 51% of the affiliate expenditures must be committed to CIS model schools. So we'll review the budgets to actual reports to ensure that this practice is followed. So it is to the organization. The organization must be dedicated 51% to the budget.
Yes, and that actually brings up a good point without going into that about, so I do want affiliates to think about how they spend all of their money, because I think a lot of affiliates don't include their executive directors in working on model work, but you are working on model work because you're raising money for CIS or you're writing grants or whatever, meeting with board members. So sometimes there's a little bit of confusion. So if you are not sure, I would just say reach out to your state office and or reach out to your reaccreditation liaison, and they can help you through that. Great. Great. So I'm going to do, hopefully, a demo. Let me put the box away and let me share. And apologies for just one moment. All right. So hopefully now you can see. Dana will shout at me if she cannot see the box.
I can see it. You're good.
All right, so this is our box. So again, yours will look very similar to this. I'm just going to move this guy down. So let's work from top to bottom, because that seems the easiest. So business documents. So we'll open this up. So again, it's the board minutes and supporting docs. So if you go into this, as I mentioned, it's only board minutes for 3.3 budget and 3.4 audit. Those are the only board minutes we're requiring for the abridged review. And so that would be reflected in this required box note. And then similarly, all of the other ones are standardized by number. So, you know, we kind of walked through organizations. So there's only 1.4 and 1.6. And as I mentioned, the reason there's no 1.1 is because we have your TLA on file and we don't require any of our affiliates to re-upload that. And the reason that there's no 1.2 is because we're not requiring it for abridged. And the reason, yeah, and similar with 1.3, we're not requiring that for abridged. So that's that. A couple of quick things. So in financial management, you'll note that we have financial management policies, budget, and audit here. If you want to put your board meeting minutes as in with your budget, that's fine. We allow you to choose where you want to put the minutes. If you want to put it with the budget, then fine. If you want to put it with the audit, then fine. If you prefer to pull those minutes out and put them in the minutes folder, that's also fine. Again, we do a comprehensive review, and so we will eventually find them if they are there. So great. So I'm going to go back out and into student support documents. And then this is just listed schools. So that's what I was saying before about you could rename it. So my elementary school was Chester Street. And I could rename it to read Chester Street. That's a helpful way. And then similarly, if you only had 2 model schools or 4 model schools, you could always delete these, and that would be over here. Oops. And then you could delete under more options if you don't want to confuse yourself. You could also just leave them blank, and we'll see that there are no files in them, and we'll say, oh, they must only have X model schools and not 5. Again, the documents required. So when these come up, they pop up into a new browser. And then it kind of lists all the things. Just reiterating, if you use the same parent guardian consent form template, you can only upload 1. Just make sure all the agreements are signed. That's often one thing that just gets overlooked, but we require them to be signed. And then again, friendly reminder about system data. We'll be doing a full data poll. So some folks find this really helpful to print out and check off, or like you could just go through and check it off. It changes colors. It's up to you. Whatever works best. So let me X out here and go back. So again, for general use services, no upload is required. So you can skip over that. And then this is the folder box.com guidance. That's literally just a bunch of guidance. So we have our welcome to your Abridges Reaccreditation 2020 folder. In here, you'll find pretty much a comprehensive list of everything that needs to be, that's required. And this is where you also find the attestations. So we can open up the oops, well, I will open it up. Open up the attestations here. And so this is the attestation. So again, this is where you would fill it in, executive director, board chairperson, save, and then the questions will change depending upon what you are. The only other thing that I wanted to mention here, so we have 2 different types of structures for, again, for some guidance. So it really just depends on what you prefer. This one is overall process. So it's quite comprehensive and includes everything. And then this is just what is required. So here you'll see that there's no 1.1, there's no 1.2, there's no 1.3, there is a 1.4. The 1.5, there is no box.com upload, but we check that anyway in the attestation. So some of these, like, even though I said we're only checking 16 standards, by sheer answering of the attestation, we actually check a couple other standards, but there's no box, there's nothing additional for you to do, just answering the attestation. So it really depends on what you like. And then these last 2 things are just PDF copies of the board chair and executive chair questions. So if you are a person who likes to print them out and handwrite your answers and then go back, you can do that. And one other thing that I wanted to show you, I forgot, is on those attestations, sorry, bubbling around, you have the option to save it at the bottom and send it to yourself. So I did want to mention that. And that way you do not have to answer it in one sitting, because there's a few pages of it, but you can save it and send it to yourself and then resume it at any time. So some folks like to do it in one sitting. They've already have their answers printed out and they know what to say. And other folks like to do it bit by bit and It's honestly whatever works best for you. So that is that. So again, I need to do a couple quick checks of just some of the documents because I just want to make sure that I'm not creating confusion by inadvertently forgetting to delete something. And then I'll be dropping essentially this into your box, hopefully next week. And that's that. So is there, let me check the questions. Do you see a couple more? Just give me one moment while I move over to the chat. Okay. Oh, we already answered that one. That's so strange. It was funny that I didn't see that 51% one until just now, but that's fine. Yes, and that's a great point with, as I was mentioning with the attestations. So these obviously in the guidance are PDFs. You can also copy those questions over into a Word doc and then save the Word doc and then just cut and paste those answers into the link when you go to the Cognito form, into the form itself. So it's whatever works best for you. If you like Word, if you like to write things out, if you like to just do everything in the Cognito form, very versatile. All right, so are there any other questions about the process? So next steps would be number one, that we get you access to your box. So you'll be receiving an email from me, again, no later than next Friday about box.com opening. And then probably the end of February, early March, you'll be receiving an email from your reaccreditation liaison about setting up just a time to chat. And that's just kind of a kickoff for them to get to know you a little bit better and to get to answer any of your questions. And if you have any concerns, they could address that, or at least flag that to address it with me at that time. Great. Anything else? I'm happy to hang on for questions, because I know I talked a lot. Okay. I don't see any, but you have my contact information. So please feel free, if you do have questions in the next few days, to contact me. Otherwise, I thank you very much for spending your Friday afternoon with me and for talking about standards and all things TQS. And I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks so much, everyone.